And that is even further illustrated with Petrobras and the CapEx. January 2009, Petrobras made another game-changer move. They said, we're going to spend a lot of money. We're going to spend a lot of money on exploration and production. So the 5-year budget that they put out, which is increasing every year, was about 180 billion reais. So in perspective, that's about $100 billion on exploration and production. Okay? So in 2009 alone, they spent $16 billion. In 2010, they're on track to spend $20 billion. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for service companies? Well, for offshore, they need a lot of offshore rigs. And the demand is huge. And offshore rigs, offshore FPSOs, platforms, all the services that go around that, there's a huge demand. And quite frankly, there's a huge demand for Canadian companies down there who have the knowledge on that offshore application. Onshore is a different world. Believe it or not, onshore is only 10% of Petrobras' total production. About 200,000 barrels a day of production comes from onshore. The funny part is onshore has been around in Brazil for the better part of 50 years. Until recently, a lot of CapEx by Petrobras was not being spent on onshore. If you look at here, I know you can't see it, but basically the onshore producing fields are around the tip of the country here, close to the beach. Basically, all the fields are within 300 kilometers of the ocean. All the interior has had very little exploration. To put it into perspective, Petrobras has drilled 30,000 wells onshore in its entire life. Now, we drill 15,000 wells a year in Alberta in good years. So it's very undeveloped compared to some of the other markets that we're used to. The oil itself is primarily light oil. A lot of it is marginal fields by Petrobras standards, and when I mean that, 100 barrel a day oil wells. They're not huge wells, but they're economic oil wells. There's no question that Petrobras is a dominant player onshore as well. As far as demand for rigs, there has been a change in the last year with Petrobras. They have decided to put more CapEx onshore, and we'll see how that actually plays out here in the next 3 or 4 months. What the ANP has done is said, we'll give you this 30% carry in the pre-salt layer, but we would like you, Petrobras, to open up more lands onshore in Brazil. And what does that mean? That means more marginal fields. So you may see some land auctions for some producing fields. You may see other fields that get opened up. And Petrobras allocates those to the ANP, and they put them up through those bid rounds, those land sales that we were talking about before. So this could be a game changer for onshore in Brazil in the next 12 months. Because of this pre-salt carry, you may have a lot of junior companies or more independent companies certainly being created. That too, Petrobras is going to spend more money onshore as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the non-Petrobras players. There are really very few that have capital to do things. You may have heard about OGX. This is the famous billionaire Ike Batista, has raised a few $1 billion, and incidentally, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan owns 30% of OGX, so Canadians are very invested in the new entrepreneurial E&P companies. HRT is another one that's very focused in the Amazon. They have a fleet of, acquiring a fleet of 6 heli-portable rigs going into the Amazon to drill wells. Odebrecht has been a legacy company, and Partex has been a legacy company. There are many others. I'm just highlighting these to give you the idea. Both these two companies are 3 years old, so it's very, very, very new. These two companies have no production onshore. They're just starting large exploration CapEx programs. On the service side is, again, still in its infancy. You've had the big guys there for a long time, and their primary market has been the offshore market. In the last 4 or 5 years since we've been there, we've seen some of the local market, the Brazilians, start creating their own service companies. One thing that's very important about Brazil is you'll hear this term local content and Brazilian content. If you want to be a service provider in Brazil, at a very short period of time, you have to become 75% Brazilian. So you have to look and feel Brazilian, and that means from your parts, your supplies, to your labor. And if you want to work for Petrobras, that's basically a given. What the ANP has also done, the oil and gas regulator, has said for the new independents coming in, if you're going to buy our blocks of land in our rounds, you also have to have a Brazilian content level. So what are the opportunities? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. You've got a country the size of the United States who's been very little explored onshore. Offshore is huge, it's for the big guys, but onshore there is a lot of opportunities. The land sales are just started coming, they're in their infancies. You have a country coming out of a monopoly phase that is very open for business. It's very straightforward as far as doing business there. There's not a lot of corruption or any of those sort of things. There is a huge amount of bureaucracy in Brazil, but you know, a Brazilian coming to Canada would probably find the same type of bureaucratic challenges as well. So there are challenges with that. The ANP itself has taken the entire database of Petrobras and puts it up on a website. So as you go to tender, you actually are amazed of how much data you can get. So in offshore, there's a lot of seismic that's already been shot. Even on the onshore basins, you can get access to a lot of data that Petrobras has shot over the last 50 years, which gives you as an E&P company a leg up to get your operation started there. If you're going to work for Petrobras, you'll see my final slide in a few slides here, which is very relevant, but you really want to play the Canadian card. And we hear that a lot, and I view the Canadian card as low-key, go in, very methodical, show your expertise. They like that a lot, okay? They spend a lot of time. You'd be amazed of how many Petrobras people have been up to Canada. The ANP, the Brazilians, they respect Canada a lot. They have followed their energy system very similar to the Alberta energy system, and they're up here very frequently looking at the different technological advances that we've come up with here in Canada. So show them you're Canadian, be very low-key, and what I mean by that is, you know, go in and be your usual humble self. Don't be aggressive and say you do it my way or the highway. Work with them. It's a very successful way to do it. Sorry about my typo there. Focus on the environment. I will say that Petrobras themselves, I've worked in a number of countries in the E&P service side. I have never seen a more stringent environmental policy and health and safety policy than with Petrobras. You want to drill a well for Petrobras or operate a well for Petrobras, you know, we've got a great system here, but the Brazilian system dwarfs what we do in Western Canada. As far as health and safety is concerned, it's paramount, and the environment is paramount as well. So what are the opportunities for service codes? Well, we've talked, I guess, a little bit about that. The immediate opportunities are really here. If you're talking onshore, which is almost offshore, is in the Amazon. The amount of capital that Petrobras is going to spend in the next 2 years in the Amazon is amazing. And the logistics of getting into the Amazon, it's just like offshore, except you're flying over a lot of rainforest. So I think to summarize, Brazil is a very low-risk environment to work in politically. I won't get into the politics. There's lots of other people that can talk about that. But I think they've demonstrated that it's got low GDP or low inflation, good GDP growth. Canadian businesses are very respected for their low-key approach. Petrobras and, you know, lots of independent E&P companies want to see technology. And a lot of the management teams that are coming in these new oil and gas startups are ex-Petrobras guys. So they're very familiar with, you know, new technologies, those sort of things. Excluding the big independents, if you're going down there as a service provider, here's my pitch for EDC, wherever EDC is. Make sure you know the credit quality of a lot of these startup E&P companies. They're very underfunded, and they do have lack of capital. So if you're providing services, just be careful you're covered off or insured there. Yeah, I think that's really it. You know, Petrobras, Brazil is not a corrupt country. It's just a very bureaucratic country. If you respect their process and you're very patient, you can get a lot of things done. Okay?